And then there is the aftermath. It's just absolutely chilling. It's like, it is like something you'd see out of a movie.
To the scene.
That's so weird. That's like something out of a movie.
And just moments later, the bomb detonated. Investigators are looking at a theory that Warner may have been motivated, at least in part, by a paranoia over 5G cell technology. Conspiracy theories falsely allege 5G networks can weaken the immune system, among other things. And intelligence agencies warned earlier this year that threats against 5G communications infrastructure are on the rise. And the conspiracy theory that shape-shifting reptilian creatures appear in human form and are bent on world domination.
Federal authorities have identified the bomber as 63-year-old Anthony Quinn Warner. DNA evidence confirms Warner's remains were found at the scene of the RV blast on Christmas Day. The vehicle exploded outside an AT&T communications hub, knocking out cell and Wi-Fi service from Tennessee to Alabama. Authorities say there are no other suspects and Nashville is considered safe. Mola Langi is in Nashville with the very latest.
Investigators are also looking into whether he may have been influenced by online conspiracy theories into 5G technology.
Surveillance video captured the sheer power of the Christmas morning blast, which brought downtown Nashville to a grinding halt. At least 3 others were injured in the blast as the RV eerily played the song Downtown by Petula Clark over a loudspeaker. It played in between minutes, counting down the bomb's imminent explosion. Video shows Officer James Wells walking away from the RV just seconds before the explosion. He said God told him to check on fellow officer Amanda Topping just down the street.
And then 3 seconds later, boom.
Well, Nikki, something great to see here. Before we talk about that, this mural was put up overnight by the I Believe in Nashville brand.
Authorities have not yet settled on a motive. They are looking at all possibilities, including credit card records, which preliminarily show the purchases of security alarms and chemical precursors, which are, perhaps the material that could have been used to create a homemade bomb.
Evacuate now. Yeah. Evacuate now. This vehicle has a bomb and will explode. Then the message changed and said, this vehicle will explode in 15 minutes. And the thing blew up right before we got down there to that intersection. And then we turned and went down First Avenue, and all the windows were blown out of back. I mean, it was chaos.
It's stayed back 2 blocks. Repeat, stayed back 2 blocks. We've had some type of large explosion, so we can figure out what's going on. We've got structural damage for at least 1 solid block.
It was a very powerful bomb. A very powerful bomb.
You guys okay?
No, my guys.
Where's your car? Okay, go to your car. What's going on?
4 days later, some business owners and residents finally able to survey the damage under FBI escort.
When you're looking at all this destruction, it's also kind of amazing that nobody was killed.
Investigators still aren't saying why Anthony Warner blew himself up in front of that AT&T building, but ABC News has learned that credit card information indicates Warner bought items that could potentially be precursor chemicals in building a bomb. Sources tell ABC News writings associated with Warner contain ramblings about multiple conspiracy theories. A neighbor telling CNN about a chilling conversation just before Christmas.
He said, "Oh yeah, I'm going to be famous. You'll never forget me."
Okay, I live at 166 2nd Avenue North. That's the building where the melting pot is located and Rodizio. And the RV was parked right outside of our window. We're on the 3rd floor, and the RV was directly across the street from our apartment.
Okay, so now let's go to what you told me and what I know authorities are looking into as well. It was around 5 or 5:30 this morning that you were awakened, and walk me through it, to the sound of gunshots initially?
Exactly. Between 5 and 5:30 a.m., we heard very loud gunshots, repetitive, like 5 to 6 shots. I'm not sure, but very loud, and that woke us up. But we only heard it for a minute, and we just thought maybe, you don't know. You live downtown, you hear things. We've been living there for 15 years. Well, about 5 minutes later, we heard it again. And then I realized, and it was in the same place right outside of our window, basically on the street. So I called 911 for the first time at 5:32 this morning was my 911 call to say that I had heard gunshots. Well, then I went downstairs. We have a 2-level apartment, and I looked out the shades of my window, which I was a little bit afraid to raise because of the gunshots were so close. And I saw an RV directly out front across the street. And I began to hear a broadcast from, like a recording coming from the RV. And it was saying, this vehicle has a bomb. If you can hear this message, you need to evacuate. And all that was happening, and it was still, I mean, that went on for about 30 minutes. But then the RV message changed and said, you have 15 minutes to evacuate. And then we heard 14 minutes. Well, I went downstairs and I looked out on the sidewalk, and I saw that police were at both ends. By the way, I did see a police officer earlier between 5:30 and 6 a.m. walk around the RV.
Okay,
and 911 told me that police had responded.
So they had responded, and we'll take it from there then. So what you're saying you heard at some point, and maybe this was something law enforcement had already been alerted to, was some kind of an announcement coming from the RV. I think you mentioned to me, did you not, it sounded recorded, a male voice, but you never saw any individual inside the RV.
No, I couldn't see inside the RV. It was parked facing in an opposite direction, so I never saw the windshield. And, you know, I was listening to something that I think you guys just played on the news, and now I'm not as positive it was a male voice, but it was definitely a recorded voice.
A recorded voice, okay.
Consistent, saying, you know, evacuate this area. This vehicle is a bomb. I mean, it has a bomb. And then it started the countdown, and the last count we heard was 8 minutes, and we were in our cars driving across the river. But then it didn't go off until sometime after that.
Okay, so yeah, do you think you made it across, you went over to Nissan Stadium, maybe in the parking area there, the countdown?
And watched our building, and we were looking right at our building, and we knew, we couldn't hear the countdown at that point, but we knew from the time that we left, you know, 20 minutes had passed, and there hadn't been an explosion, so we started driving back. We came back across KVD Bridge, and we're going to turn down 2nd Avenue. In fact, we made it almost down, we were on 2nd Avenue. Headed towards Broadway, but not quite to Broadway, and that's when we saw the explosion.
So at that point, you thought, hey, this may have been some type of hoax, and then, boom, it went off.
Yeah, we thought it was over, and then it happened, and then we just pulled over, and of course, by that time, everything was blocked off. And
wow. Do you know, by the way,
we're in a hotel now.
Just to ask you this, do you know, were there other residents in the building, to your knowledge, that got out safely, perhaps, or?
Not in our building is a vacation rental business. We run that. Now, 2 of our family members are here. We have, and we got them out with us. They were in separate apartments, but they came with us. So the only 4 people in our building got out.
Had you not gotten out, do you think you would have been harmed?
Oh, definitely. You all been showing it on here. We're the building straight across from the explosion. The whole front of our building is blown up.
So you might have been killed. You might have been killed if not for that warning.
Yes, if not for the warning. If that person had just detonated that bomb with no warning and no gunshots, we would have been either very seriously injured or killed.
Let me ask you this, too. As someone who's familiar, obviously, very familiar with 2nd Avenue, the fact that there would have been an RV parked there along that stretch on Christmas morning, not that unto itself, by itself, just sitting there, is not all that unusual, would it be? There were other vehicles parked on the road. That wouldn't have been suspicious by itself, would it?
No, it wouldn't have, and especially because it's the holidays and people know that parking's not being enforced. I would have assumed that was some family visiting somebody, and they just parked their RV there.
So it's your belief, then, that the early response from law enforcement, and obviously how you were able to get out of there, is because of combination, the gunshots, which really right now we can't really explain what those were all about, and then the warning from the vehicle.
Exactly. Yeah, the gunshots, and I mentioned this before, and I'm not sure of this, but the gunshots were so loud, there is a possibility. We've wondered now if they weren't a recording that came from the vehicle as well.
Interesting.
We don't know that, but as we've reflected back on it, because we heard it 3 times, it was exactly the same. You know, we wonder now if we weren't listening to a recording, but we don't know. But the gunshots definitely is what woke us up. And then, because the recording, I don't think would have been loud enough to wake us up if we hadn't heard the gunshots.
Of course. By the way, do you have any inkling, and not something you would have necessarily noticed, but how long had the RV been there? Was it there earlier in the day? Do you think it just showed up overnight? Do you have any idea?
I don't know. I'm pretty sure it was not. I went out yesterday morning. I went to do a little last-minute shopping, and I don't remember seeing it then. I feel like I might have noticed because the street was pretty dead. You know, I mean, there were a few workman-type cars there, but I didn't notice it, no. But So I don't know.
And you would, and by the way,
I didn't take a picture of it or anything.
Sure. Why would you? Of course. And can you give me though kind of a description of it? An older RV, a new one? Is this one of those where there was a camper attached to a pickup, or how would you describe it?
No, it was a single vehicle. It was definitely one vehicle.
Okay.
You know, like a bigger kind of RV. It wasn't all beat up looking, but it wasn't new. You know, it wasn't one of those slick-sided ones. It was more of an older one. But it was large. I mean, it was a large RV, and it was an older one.
Now, do you have any idea when you'll be allowed back into the area? And for now, I assume you're elsewhere.
Yeah, we're at a hotel now. Honestly, it's very difficult to tell. I don't know which building for sure is ours that you're all showing on the film, but I know all of our front windows are blown out, our apartment's blown out. I can't imagine that we'll be back in for days, and we didn't come out with anything but the clothes on our backs and pajamas.
And again, since you're very familiar with that area, we know there are restaurants and clubs there. Can you think of anything there in your mind, and I'm just asking you as a citizen who lives in that area, that would have been a potential target?
No, I can't. I mean, our thought was they must be after the AT&T building. That was our thought, just because, that's where they were parked, on that side of the street. They chose not, thank God, to go down to Broadway and destroy everything. So, I mean, our thought was they must have been aiming for the building that they parked close to.
Gotcha. Well, that's certainly something I know law enforcement will be going to look at, and that's just speculation right now. But listen, ma'am, thank you so much for joining us, and I'm so glad you were safe.
And for more on the explosion, we are joined by Tom Mikaitis. He is a DePaul professor as well as a terrorism expert. Thank you for joining us, Tom.
Well, first of all, it's a very common type of attack. I would guess, based on what I've seen, that it was probably a fertilizer bomb laced with accelerant, similar to the one that was used in Oklahoma City and has been used in other attacks as well. Beyond that, I would describe this as a very bizarre incident. When you go to the trouble to make a bomb of that size and that lethality, to detonate it at a time and place with a warning, apparently, where it's likely not to cause casualties of any great extent, it doesn't fit the pattern of any known group. Islamists like body count. White supremacists tend to like government targets. They're not going to pick a city in a very red state, and they're not going to pick a restaurant area. So I'm thinking at this point it's almost a Ted Kaczynski Unabomber, idiosyncratic lone wolf, but we won't know for a while.
Well, I know that they will, authorities will be examining the forensics of this to try to understand, who ultimately did this, while also asking the questions that you just raised about why would this happen? Mm-hmm. What sort of things will they be able to kind of take away from the blast site?
Well, first of all, the vehicle identification number is stamped on various parts, including parts of the chassis. So it's extremely likely when they sort through the debris that they will actually identify the vehicle.
Can you talk about the VIN? Was it a VIN number that was found, and how that was?
The VIN number. You want to talk about that?
VIN number. How you were? Because this blast, this is a massive blast. How were you able to find that VIN number?
Well, our special agents with Tennessee Highway Patrol are trained in that. We have responsibilities there, and they were able to come out starting Christmas night and then coming again once daylight, came up the next day, yesterday, and just help identify on particular vehicle parts.
So it was a vehicle part that you found in the debris that ultimately led to the identification?
I can't answer that exactly. Vehicle parts help connect the vehicle to the suspect. I believe tips and other information came in to help identify him.
The parts that contained the full VIN had been destroyed. We started looking for component parts that could possibly contain a derivative serial number for that vehicle.
How large is a derivative of a VIN number?
A derivative number is 5 to 6 numbers long, and usually they're about 6 millimeters in height. So it's really, really, really small.
Amazingly, within hours, the team identified what would appear to the untrained eye as 2 tiny pieces of melted debris covered in soot. But the experts knew a partial VIN number was hiding inside.
The FBI has a process where they can go in and start rubbing those off and seeing the residual of that number to help us identify it.
A key clue now revealed.
Today, part of the downtown area remains a crime scene.
It's like a giant jigsaw puzzle created by a bomb that throws pieces of evidence across multiple city blocks.
There is a picture emerging.
All right, investigators say human tissue was found in the area, but they stopped short of linking it to a possible suspect or a victim. What do you make of that?
What's interesting is that the speculation about this being human tissue, the likelihood of it being someone who was in that vehicle is going to be very low. If that explosion, based on the images that we've seen thus far, was of the impact that we suggested is, that person inside would have been vaporized. So I would hardly doubt we're going to find any tissue from anybody who might have been inside that vehicle, but certainly someone who may have been in the area, someone who may have been walking, evacuated and came back, perhaps. You may find someone there. Hopefully not.
I was laying in bed and just all my windows, everything came through. My door, like bricks out of my wall came through. It was really bad. And it just sounded like a giant explosion, but I heard like 3 kind of different explosions. So I don't really know if it was like one full one or what, but that's what it sounded like.
Our whole life surrounded by bomb wreckage was hard to see.
When that first explosion hit, it was so tremendous. Like, I have a well-built building, and these windows came into my room. Everything in the bathroom was completely demolished. Water was going everything. And I was really thinking, like, that there was some kind of a war going on, and that this could be, this could be something that I wouldn't get through, that I would not make it through for just a little bit. You're waking up from a sleep and you're wondering, is this really happening?
A lot of us thought that this morning, even just turning on the news. McCoy says he has since not been allowed back into his building, but says he feels very lucky to be alive on this Christmas Day.
That's a man and his dog. They've stopped. Now you'll see the officer come in from the right side, and the officer's speaking to him. Now listen to it. Keep listening. I don't know if you can understand what was being said between the two parties, the police officer and the dog.
I was taking the dog for a walk with Black German Shepherd, and I was standing in the middle of the street. So I literally saw the explosion go off.
And can you describe it?
Yeah, I mean, it was just a huge fireball that crossed the street and went up in the air. I did not feel any concussion from the explosion, and I didn't feel any ear damage, and my dog didn't like leap in the air or freak out or anything. So even though it blew out all these windows and everything all around us, I didn't feel that concussion standing out in the middle of the street. We're all kind of a little frazzled by it. The whole place is like covered in black dust and soot and everything everywhere. So we're trying to figure out how to clean this up and to get started on it. And yeah, we're a little bit shook up about it for sure. We kind of would like to maybe get out of here and not stay here, but I don't think we're going anywhere. So I think we're here. I'm thankful that I can, that I'm not hurt. Nobody was hurt that I'm aware of. And, Merry Christmas.
Gunfire and audio messages from a vehicle warning it would explode in 15 minutes. That's what one resident says she awoke to Christmas morning before she saw a massive explosion near her home. I want to get an eyewitness report from the scene. Betsy Williams joins me now. Betsy, thanks so much for being with us, and I'm sorry we're talking under these circumstances. I understand you were woken up, you say, by what sounded like gunfire.
We, at 11, when there were still 11 minutes left, we got on the elevator and went downstairs, and by the time we got to our garage where our car was parked on First Avenue, the last thing we heard was there were 8 minutes left to evacuate. And
so the recording is counting down minute by minute?
Yes, it was counting down. It was saying you have 15 minutes to evacuate, and then, and it would say that over and over, and then you have 14 minutes to evacuate.
So during that, sorry to interrupt, but just to be clear, so when it would say you have 15 minutes to evacuate, it would say that over and over the course of a minute, and then it would say you have 14 minutes, and it would say that over and over?
Yes.
Wow. That must be
did
terrifying.
That all the way down. And I mean, I didn't hear it anymore after 8 minutes because we were in the car.
I mean, that must be terrifying.
It was absolutely terrifying. And I mean, and you know, I told my family yesterday, I said, you know, I think I'm just going to spend all day Christmas in my pajamas. But, you know, I didn't mean that I wasn't going to have anything else to put on because we walked out of there with our pajamas and our cat.
This is not how you expected to spend the day in your pajamas. You were expecting a more relaxing day.
Right. You know, and we had all of our Christmas stuff set up, and in fact, our Christmas tree and everything is in the apartment that overlooks the river. It's a larger apartment that overlooks the Cumberland River, and so we went back around there after the explosion because we left. You know, what happened was that I'm sorry I didn't finish this. You know, the countdown started, and we went and got in our car, and we left and went across the river to Nissan Stadium and parked there for several minutes. And after we knew that the time had passed where the bomb was going to go off, I mean, the 15 minutes had passed, we went, well, that must have just been somebody's sick idea of a joke. And we got back on Korean Veterans Boulevard and turned down 2nd Avenue, heading north to come back down there because we were thinking, you know, we'll just go home. And, of course, then the bomb exploded while we were on our way back down there, and we saw that thing, the fireball went all the way up past the AT&T, above the AT&T building. Everything just, I mean, everything shook. It was quite the blast. Drove as far up to our building through all the glass and took a couple of pictures, and our Christmas tree was still on. And we could see the Christmas tree through the window where it was just still burning.
And we've been showing some of your pictures. Let me just ask you.
Let's go ahead and toss it to Chelsea Beimfor. She's at the staging area with an...
We're going to show you some new video. Again, we continue to get new video in just a moment here. I will hush, but on the right side of your screen, when we show you the video, you will see the explosion as it takes place. Let's show you the video now.
All right, so that is the vantage point from a security camera at Cross Point Church in downtown. Thank you for sharing that with us. I want to make sure that you get credit for giving that video to us there through the area, but that is certainly a vantage point from that explosion.
Listen to the power. That's a huge explosion. And that really shows the plume and how big it was.
Blown out, and our Christmas tree still standing there.
FBI and ATF response teams continue to recover evidence at the bomb scene, hoping to figure out why 63-year-old Anthony Warner blew up his RV.
Oh my gosh.
Noelle, Jeffrey, and their 2 kids ran to safety early Friday morning, capturing this video shortly after police knocked on their door and told them to get out. Seeing the impact of the blast for the first time, they cannot believe more people weren't hurt or even killed.
This morning in Nashville, authorities may be closer to figuring out who set off a bomb on Christmas. The explosion, authorities calling intentional, came from an RV broadcasting a warning to evacuate before detonating. 3 people were injured, 40 buildings damaged or destroyed, including an AT&T data facility. The AT&T outage disrupted 911 access and grounded flights at Nashville Airport Friday. And with no timeline for full restoration, residents across Tennessee and in parts of Georgia, Alabama, and Kentucky are cut off from cell phone and internet access.
When the impact happened, it blew open our front door and windows and the whole structure. Actually, the first level insurance has been blown out.
Can't check the damage himself. Now, after losing money to the pandemic, the scene, almost too much. This morning crime. Explosion authorities call intentional, shattered windows, smashed through doors, and damaged nearly 40 downtown buildings. The blast coming from an RV parked near the AT&T transmission building and right outside the home of Betsy Williams, who woke to the sound of gunshots, then heard a strange voice coming from the vehicle.
A lot of people seriously injured had they not taken those actions.
The AT&T outage disrupted 911 access and grounded flights at Nashville Airport yesterday. Music City, eerily quiet. As investigators piece together a crime scene they call a massive puzzle.
Good morning. The building's on fire, Cindy. I told you it was. Oh, God.
Responded, and after assessing the vehicle had reason to call our hazardous devices unit. The hazardous devices unit was en route to the downtown area when an explosion linked to that vehicle took place at 6:30.
The active ongoing situation here and to give our people space to work in. But once again, right now, we don't have any significant injuries to report. Thank you.
Shattered glass, window panes laying on the living room of his floor, and decorations and personal items just all strewn about. So as far as we know, he is okay. He was able to send us that video, and as we've been reporting all day.
There is no indication presently that anyone else was involved in this crime.
The Nashville bombing is prompting new concerns tonight about so-called lone wolf terror threats here in the U.S.
It's often more difficult for investigators to determine what's motivated lone wolves, as is the case in Nashville.
It becomes very difficult to sort of pinpoint the nature of this individual.
This morning, investigators are piecing together clues from that devastating Christmas Day bombing in Nashville, trying to figure out why 63-year-old Anthony Quinn Warner blew himself up inside an RV.
Noel, it must be very difficult for you, especially on Christmas, you and your family. We have video that you shot from this morning. Tell us how your day has started.
Yeah, so we were all in bed. We have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, and it was about 5:50 in the morning, and we heard loud banging at the door, and over and over and over again. So we went sleepy in our pajamas to the door, and there was a policeman and a policewoman telling us to evacuate immediately. And we were confused, and we had all our presents set out for our kids to go see, and we were like asking if there was any way we could stay, and they said no, that there was a public threat. So we woke up our kids and put on shoes and jackets and left and got in our car and drove away. And as we were driving away, I was turning around to look. We were trying to make a plan for where we were going to go during COVID. We're trying not to go to anyone's house,
Sure.
So what we could do. And I was looking at our stretch of buildings downtown, and I saw it explode. I saw a huge explosion, a big orange, fireball up in the air about twice as tall as our building. And I just said to my husband, "Oh my gosh, I think our building just exploded." And
what was going through your mind seeing that?
immediately, I was so grateful we left. You know, my husband had even said, oh, they kind of do these things. Someone might be depressed in the building and making a threat or something, you know. And I said, well, I don't want to chance it. I just think we should go. And it was so insane. I mean, McDonald's wasn't even open for breakfast. So it was really like, what's our plan? I don't know. And as I saw it explode. I'm so glad we left. So glad we have our kids. And above anything else, I am so glad for those officers who walked into a building that they knew was a dangerous spot to be and, you know, woke us up and got us out. And our windows were blown out right at the Christmas tree. So we could see our tree was in there, and it looked like a lot of water was pouring out of the building. So it seems like the sprinklers all went off. And when I went around to the front side of the street, and I was shooting the cell phone video, everything was on fire. Several cars were burning, so much smoke. The candy shop on the corner that we get candy from was completely blown out. And then as I looked over, our front entrance is right next to the Hooters sign. Just a huge chunk of the top of our front side of our building collapsed off as I was looking at it. So it looks like the whole front side of our building's been blown off. And we're so grateful that, you know, the people got out and that we were on the back side of the building, you know.
Can you give me a better idea of the types of people who live in this area? Is it a lot of young families like yours?
Actually, no. We're kind of an outlier. It's a really cool, funky stretch of old warehouses, 4-story, 5-story warehouses, brick warehouses that have been turned into a lot of Airbnbs, really. So there are only a few permanent residents. We're the only one with kids in the area that I know of. But there are a lot of vacationers, another young couple with some dogs that do live in our building. So thankfully, you know, not a lot of permanent families.
And do you have any sort of idea? I'm just looking at these aerials right now and the sheer scale of this devastation from this explosion. Do you have any sort of idea when you'll be able to go back and survey, you know, how your apartment is?
No, we really don't. You know, at a time like this, I call my dad, and he seems to know, you know, the best. And he was saying, "Hun, you gotta be prepared to maybe not go back for a couple of weeks. That you might, you know, that building might get condemned. They're, you know, these really old, 150-year-old buildings, and they weren't built for, you know, to withstand things like this. So." We're kind of trying to mentally go through, okay, Christmas is scratched. We went to a Walgreens because that was the only thing open to get diapers and prescriptions and bottles. And we're just trying to be prepared for if the building's condemned and our stuff is ruined. And that's hard, but that's okay. You know, my most precious things are with me now, and that's really what matters.
Yeah, Nicole Rasmussen, my heart goes out to you and your family. We're so glad that you're safe on this Christmas day. This truly is a Christmas miracle, it sounds like, for you and your family. Thank you so much. Pat Milton, Nick Barris, and Nicole Rasmussen, thank you for filling us in. Here's what we know as of now. The explosion happened at around 6:30 a.m. local time. Nashville police say the blast was linked to a suspicious vehicle in the downtown area. They're calling the explosion a, quote, intentional act. However, the FBI is not making that determination right now. Our CBS affiliate in Nashville reports at least 3 people have been hospitalized. Nashville's mayor says at least 20 buildings have been damaged. And President Trump has been briefed on the situation and will continue to receive updates.
Seems like it's an attack. If it was an attack, that was designed to send a message to somebody more than actually wound or kill, which is what you see sort of out of some of the other type of attacks out of the Middle East or inspired by ISIS or Al-Qaeda ideologies.
Well, you know, you bring up a good point. This happened at 6:30 on Christmas morning. The only people who seemed to be in the area, frankly, were the first responders who were headed to the scene for shots fired. Is there any potential that this could have been a target against police or first responders?
You know, since the beginning of police and firefighters, there have always been people in the world who wanted to take a shot at them. One of the things that officers and firefighters and EMTs and everybody in the first response business is always looking for right now is, where is that secondary device? Where is that secondary attack? So even if you're walking into a 911 call for shots fired or for domestic disturbance, you always have to have your threat awareness radar on, looking for what else might be out there. And that's possible that what they were looking to do here is target first responders, who unfortunately are always a target. And it looks like in this scenario, the police who responded to this initial call did a very thorough search. They saw something that didn't seem seemed like it belonged, and they were able to start clearing out residents and bringing in specialized units to neutralize the threat. In this case, the device, assuming it is a device, went off before that could happen, but the authorities were able to clear people out of the area, which saved a lot of lives this morning.
I also want to dissect one other thing that you said about potentially this explosion being used to send a message to someone or a business or something. Are investigators going to be scouring perhaps social media and asking the surrounding buildings if they've received any sorts of threats? Is that going to be a key part of this investigation as we move forward?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. There's going to be a multi-pronged approach here. Witnesses talking to doormen, talking to maintenance personnel and all these businesses about something that looked out of place, and then going door to door to all these business owners and taking advantage of any surveillance video that might be stored for the last few days, the last few months, because what we know about these types of attacks is that they're usually very well planned and that the perpetrators make several trips to do reconnaissance on whatever they're targeting before they put a plan like this into motion. And there's a lot of high tech where you're looking at Twitter and CCTV cameras, but there's also a lot of low tech shoe leather, detective work that goes on that it's the same way it would gone on if it was, 1920 as it is in 2020.
That's interesting. I also just want to ask you really quick about the materials that potentially could have led to this explosion. So obviously this is a huge explosion where the debris radius is blocks and blocks and blocks. This isn't some smaller kind of, pressure cooker situation like what we've seen in New York City in the past. What are investigators going to be doing when it comes to piecing together what the materials were used? How big of an explosive device, if it is in fact an explosive device that was used, how big that would be?
Well, what they're going to do is, and if they're not already on the ground, they will be in a matter of hours. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms at the federal level has experts who spend their life's work learning how to reconstruct incendiary devices. And so if the consensus so far is that this came from an RV or a recreational vehicle, what they're going to do is go blocks in either direction and try and piece back together that recreational vehicle and figure out what kind of an accelerant was used to turn that vehicle into a bomb. There's lots of things in a vehicle that you can make blow up. There's a gas tank. There's lots of metal paneling that you can use as shrapnel. So you don't need a tremendous explosive device to turn that vehicle into a bomb. And so what the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, along with the FBI and the state and local authorities will do is they will literally reconstruct this vehicle based upon the wreckage, usually out at an airport hangar somewhere where they have lots of room to work. And they will try and put it back together and make as complete a package as possible, and from there gather a lot of clues. For those of us who are old enough to remember the 1993 first World Trade Center bombing, the way the perpetrators were caught was that the FBI and the New York City Police Department, wherever, were able to reconstruct the rental van that was used as a bomb and actually catch the perpetrator who went back to the rental company to get the deposit back because he said it was stolen. So those are the kinds of things that are going on starting today, but for the next few weeks. And this will be a slow investigation at first because there's a lot of evidence, there's a lot of footage to look at and to gather, but then it will start to zero in, and I feel confident that the perpetrator will be caught.
Yeah, it sounds like there's lots of work still to be done. Thankfully, not a ton of people out and about in the area during this massive explosion.
As investigators comb through what is left of the Christmas Day bombing, experts are now providing insight on the tools used to create this bomb. Good evening, I'm Alex Dennis. News 2's Maya Owens spoke with an explosive expert who says there are a few clues if you know what to look for.
For the average person looking at the aftermath of the bomb scene, it may simply look like chaos and destruction. But for an explosive expert, there are clues that give insight into the bomber.
And when a bomb goes off, a lot of times the bombers and people think that everything is destroyed. Nothing is really destroyed. It's all changed. The form is changed of all the parts of the bomb. They look different, but they will put it back together and they will know how it was built, what it was made of. And
take this video captured by First Baptist Church, for example.
From the church, and I saw how much of that energy went up. It changed my perspective a little bit. I think the explosive was a little faster, a little higher detonation velocity than what I initially thought. And some of the pyrotechnic mixtures and smokeless powder can detonate, like I said, can detonate at velocities at or above high explosive thresholds.
Smoke patterns are also a major factor, with many people across Middle Tennessee reporting they could feel the explosion. Debris from the RV will be key to finding out where and how the bomb was put together.
My first thoughts were it was probably a homemade type explosive or either over the counter like smokeless powder. In a large quantity, smokeless powder, shotgun powder can detonate like a high explosive or close to high explosive detonation velocity.
Now some are wondering if a vacuum bomb was used, also known as a fuel explosive, that can cause a large yellow or orange fire. But Hike believes that's unlikely.
To make that work is you'll have a fuel and you have to aerosol it, or you have to mix that fuel with the oxygen and then ignite it. So it's very difficult to do.
As investigators continue to search for clues, looking to piece together evidence in order to see the whole picture. Maya Owens, News 2.
Knowing how the bomb was put together could help law enforcement ensure this doesn't happen again in the future.
All right, federal investigators have left downtown, and today some business owners finally got back into those buildings. Few words can really describe what they felt, seeing so much destruction left behind from the Christmas Day bombing.
The images are stunning. Blown out windows, crumbled buildings, and debris littered on the street. But the sound shakes anyone to their core. The bomb that exploded on 2nd Avenue in Nashville is now sending the community on a mission to revive what it stripped away. More than 40 buildings were damaged in the explosion. Herbert says Metro Codes will work with property owners to expedite permits for rehabilitation of the vast majority of the affected buildings and for the few buildings where demolition may be required.
2020 has been a tough year for Nashville.
Today, new information. More than 500 tips came in. Authorities now identifying a person of interest.
We also have national resources here.
According to the Associated Press, authorities investigated a home in Antioch about 10 miles southeast of the explosion. No name has been released just yet. A neighbor who lives near the person of interest says she hardly ever saw them.
Town looking for clues after a parked RV rigged with explosives blew up. At least 3 people were hurt.
The blast, which police believe was intentional, damaged dozens of buildings and injured 3 people. Before the explosion, the RV blared a warning that it was loaded with explosives.
It shattered windows, shook buildings, and sent a tower of black smoke high above downtown Nashville. Police have released this photo of the RV, which was parked near an AT&T transmission building. The blast caused communications outages and forced flights at Nashville's airport to be grounded. But so far, there is no known motive and no suspect. As the investigation here begins, Cooper says it's also time to heal.
We hate having to prove that we're resilient one more time, but we're going to do it. Which are first responders that went and saved lives this morning, and now you're going to have investigators who are going to catch the people who did this.
Then a voice started a 15-minute countdown. Officers scrambled to get people out of their homes, but the device went off just as the police bomb squad was heading to the area. The neighborhood is home to country music venues and restaurants. Officials say it's fortunate the bomb went off so early when the area was empty, almost. Police are now investigating the possibility that human remains were found near the explosion site. 911 emergency service was disrupted following the blast. Cell phone providers also reported service outages when their facilities were damaged by the explosion. The FBI is leading the investigation in what officials call an intentional act, though their investigation is expected to keep the neighborhood largely shut down into the weekend. Derek Stoffel, CBC News, Washington.
Video of the downtown bomb on Christmas Day gives us our best view yet of the explosion and the fireball it sent towards the sky. For the first time, we're talking with an explosives expert about what he thinks was in the bomb. As News Channel 5's Kyle Horan learned, it's material that almost anyone can buy.
A portion of downtown was engulfed in this fireball. This video from the top of Acme Feed and Seed gives us our best look yet at the explosion. A plume of fire and smoke rises well above the nearby buildings. This footage can tell a lot to an explosion expert such as David Heitch. This video shows those investigators so much.
A couple of things. One, the duration of the thermal event, or how long it took for the fuel to be consumed. All explosives are a fuel and an oxidizer. There was a lot of fuel, and it's a long thermal event. A high explosive will typically happen in an instant, and the energy or the fuel and the oxidizer are so at such a balance that it's consumed almost instantaneously. And
Heitch says his theory is that the explosive was made out of pyrotechnics, at least in part. Crime scene investigators will go try to find the cause of these two splashes in the Cumberland River.
Explosives follow the path of least resistance. Down the street in both directions and up is where the bulk of the debris and where the bulk of the energy went in that explosion.
Kyle Horan, News Channel 5.